I found the lilies in the outside trash can on a Tuesday morning. Stems snapped in half, petals bruised brown where they had been shoved down under a week of coffee grounds and junk mail. My husband hadn't even bothered to hide them well. He had simply walked them from the front porch to the curb, lifted the lid, and buried 12 years of a mystery I had only just begun to understand, without once asking me if I wanted to keep it. I stood there in my robe with the garbage lid still swinging on its hinge, and for the first time in our marriage, I understood that Nathaniel Winters was capable of a very specific kind of cruelty. The quiet kind. The kind that never raises its voice. The kind that simply decides what you're allowed to grieve. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. My name is Renee Winters. I'm 43 years old, a pediatrician at a children's hospital in Louisville, Kentucky. And for 12 years, someone I had never met sent white lilies to my car every single Monday without a signature, a note, or an explanation. I had spent months learning who he was and why he did it. What I had not expected was that my own husband, my son's father, the man who had shared my bed for 18 years, had known something about those flowers long before I ever untangled the truth for myself, and had chosen, bouquet by bouquet, to make them disappear before I ever got the chance to hold one. That morning at the curb raised 3 questions I couldn't shake. How long had Nathaniel been throwing them away, and how many had I never even known arrived? What did he know about the man sending them that he had never once told me? And if he had been keeping this from me for years, what else? In 18 years of marriage, had he decided I didn't need to know? To understand why a bundle of flowers could crack something open in my marriage, you have to understand what those flowers meant to me first. For 12 years, every Monday, I found white lilies laid across my windshield in the parking garage of the children's hospital where I've worked my entire career. No card, no name, just lilies, rain or shine, in every season, for over a decade. I used to tell myself it was a mistake, a standing floral order gone to the wrong car, until I finally hired a private investigator and tracked the delivery back through a florist's paper ledger to a man named Solomon Ray, whose wife, Marlene, had died in my care years earlier during a night I still remembered in painful detail, and whose daughter, Autumn, I had also once treated as a very small child. The lilies, I learned, were his way of saying thank you for something I had done that night that I hadn't even realized mattered to him. A decision I made in a hallway, half asleep on a double shift, that changed the last hours his wife had with her daughter. I had cried reading the archived hospital record that confirmed it. I thought, foolishly, that solving the mystery would be the end of the story. I am a pediatrician, 43 years old, and I have built my entire adult life around the belief that showing up for other people's children matters more than almost anything else. More, some seasons, than showing up for my own family, which is its own grief I carry separately. I am married to Nathaniel Winters, a man I fell in love with in my 20s because he never once made me feel guilty for the hours the job demanded of me. We have 2 children. Our daughter Nora is 15, sharp-tongued and watchful in the way teenagers get right before they stop needing you to explain yourself. Our son, Elijah, is 8, and still young enough to tell me everything he notices, which is more than either of his parents realize most days. My mother-in-law, Geraldine, has never fully believed that a woman can be both a good doctor and a good wife, and she has never been shy about saying so at holiday dinners. My father-in-law, Harold, is the gentler half of that marriage, the one who quietly refills my coffee when Geraldine starts in on me and never says a word against her. Nathaniel had known about the lilies for as long as I had been receiving them, in the sense that he saw them arrive on our porch on the mornings the florist redirected deliveries there instead of the parking garage, which had started happening more often once Solomon Ray learned, through the investigator I'd hired, that I'd finally identified him. For a while after the mystery resolved, the 2 of us had an unspoken understanding. Solomon would occasionally send a bouquet to the house now instead of the hospital, a small act of continued gratitude, and I would set it in a vase on the kitchen table where our family could see it. It felt, for a few months, like something healing rather than haunting. Nathaniel had smiled about it at dinner more than once. He had asked polite, distant questions about Autumn's schooling and Solomon's new job at a warehouse across town. I had no reason to believe anything was wrong. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't learn until that Tuesday morning at the curb, was that somewhere in those months, something in Nathaniel had shifted. The bouquets that used to sit proudly on our table had begun, one by one, to vanish before I ever saw them. I assumed, when I noticed a gap of a week or two, that Solomon had simply slowed his sending, the way grief eventually does slow, softening at its own pace. I told myself it made sense. I had no idea my own husband had become the reason the flowers stopped reaching me at all, and no idea that his silence about it had already been going on for close to 2 months by the time I found the ruined stems in our trash can and realized the gaps I'd noticed were never gaps at all. Looking back now, I can point to small moments that should have told me something was wrong long before that Tuesday. Nathaniel had stopped asking about Autumn's schooling. He'd started leaving for work earlier than his shift required, always claiming traffic. And once, only once, I'd caught him standing at the kitchen window at 6 in the morning, staring at the empty porch step, before he noticed me and turned away without a word. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. I think about it constantly now. The Tuesday morning it happened, I was only outside because Elijah had forgotten his library book, and I'd gone to check the porch bench where he sometimes leaves his things overnight. That's when I saw it. The lid of our garbage bin not quite latched, a single white petal caught in the rubber seal, trembling slightly in the wind like it was trying to get my attention. I almost walked past it. Some instinct, the same one that's kept me alive through 11 years of night shifts, made me stop and lift the lid instead. There were 4 bouquets inside, in various stages of ruin. The freshest one, still faintly fragrant, had clearly gone in the night before. The oldest had been there long enough to blacken at the edges, pressed flat under the weight of the trash bags stacked on top of it. I stood in my robe in the cold, pulling each one out with my bare hands, laying them across the top of the closed lid like evidence at a crime scene, because that's exactly what it felt like. 4 Mondays. At least 4 Mondays where Solomon Ray had sent something, and I had never known it arrived. I carried them inside, still wet with morning dew, and set them on the kitchen counter, right where Nathaniel would see them the second he came downstairs for coffee. I didn't say anything. I wanted to watch his face before I gave him the chance to prepare an answer. When he walked in 10 minutes later, freshly showered, reaching for the coffee pot on autopilot, his eyes caught the flowers, and I watched something in his shoulders drop. Not confusion, not surprise, but the particular stillness of a man who has just been caught doing something he'd hoped never to explain. "Where did you find these?" he said. Not a question, really. A statement dressed as one. "In the trash," I said. "Where you put them? How many others, Nathaniel? How many Mondays has this happened?" He didn't answer right away. He poured his coffee like his hands needed something to do. And for a long moment, the only sound in the kitchen was the drip of the machine and Elijah's cartoons murmuring from the living room down the hall. When he finally turned to face me, his expression wasn't guilty exactly. It was tired, in a way I'd never seen on him before. Tired the way I get after a 20-hour shift. Except this exhaustion had clearly been building for months, hidden behind every ordinary dinner and every "how was your day?" "I didn't want you to have to think about them anymore," he said. "I thought if they just stopped coming, you'd let it rest. I thought you'd finally get some peace." "That wasn't your decision to make," I said, and my voice came out sharper than I intended. Sharp enough that I heard Nora's footsteps pause on the stairs above us. Sharp enough that Elijah's cartoon suddenly seemed very far away. "Those flowers weren't a burden, Nathaniel. They were the only thing left of a woman I couldn't save. You don't get to decide I'm done grieving her just because it's inconvenient for you." His jaw tightened. "That's not what this is." "Then, what is it?" He looked at the ruined lilies on the counter instead of at me. And for the first time in 18 years of marriage, I watched my husband choose silence over an answer he clearly had ready in his mouth. He set his coffee mug down harder than he needed to, and for a moment I thought he might actually tell me everything right there in the kitchen, standing in his socks with Elijah's cartoons still murmuring down the hall. Instead, he grabbed his keys off the counter, said he had an early meeting he couldn't miss, and left through the garage door without kissing me goodbye for the first time since we'd started dating in our 20s. I stood there listening to his truck pull out of the driveway, and I realized my hands were still trembling from holding the ruined flowers. Nora came down the stairs a few minutes later, backpack over one shoulder, and stopped in the kitchen doorway when she saw the lilies still laid out across the counter, like something out of a funeral. "Is that from the guy Dad won't talk about?" she asked. And I remember being startled that she even knew there was a guy at all, that somewhere in the last few months she'd picked up on a tension neither Nathaniel nor I had thought we were showing. I told her the truth, or as much of it as I understood in that moment, that someone had been sending flowers for years out of gratitude, and that her father had apparently been throwing them away without telling me. She was quiet for a second, and then she said something that has stayed with me since. "That's kind of messed up, Mom. Those aren't his to throw away." 15 years old, and she understood something. It had taken me a full morning to name out loud. I drove to the hospital that day on autopilot, running on almost no sleep, and somehow still managed to get through back-to-back appointments. A toddler with an ear infection, a set of twins due for their boosters, a teenager whose mother wanted to discuss growth charts in more detail than any 15-year-old wants to sit through. I am good at compartmentalizing. It's a skill the job demands of you whether you want it or not. But somewhere around lunch, standing in the supply closet, reorganizing gauze I didn't need to reorganize, I let myself cry for exactly 4 minutes, checked my watch, wiped my face, and went back out to see my next patient like nothing had happened. That's the job. That's always been the job. By the time I got home that evening, Nathaniel still hadn't texted me once, which was its own kind of answer. He came home late, later than his schedule should have allowed, and when he finally walked through the door, he looked like a man who had spent the entire day rehearsing something and still hadn't found the right words for it. He didn't bring it up first. I did. "I want to know how long," I said, standing in the doorway to the kitchen so he couldn't slip past me toward the stairs. "Not an estimate. An actual number, Nathaniel. How many Mondays?" He finally met my eyes, and something in his face cracked slightly, the way ice does right before it gives. "I don't know the exact number," he said quietly. "Maybe 8, maybe 9. I stopped counting because counting made it feel like something I was doing on purpose, and I didn't want to think of it that way. "But you were doing it on purpose," I said. "Every single time you picked one up off that porch and walked it to the trash can instead of the kitchen table, that was a choice, Nathaniel. You don't get to call it an accident just because you didn't count." He didn't argue. And before we go further, if this story already has you hooked, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're watching from. I read every single one. Nathaniel left for work without finishing his coffee that morning, which he had never done once in 18 years. Not even the week his own father had emergency surgery. I stood in the kitchen alone with 4 ruined bouquets and a silence that felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. And I did the only thing I know how to do when I don't understand something. I started investigating. The same instinct that had cracked open the original mystery of the lilies in the first place. I didn't hire an investigator this time. I didn't need one. I went looking through the one place I knew Nathaniel kept things he didn't want found. The metal filing box in the garage where he'd stored our old tax returns, warranty paperwork, and a decade of documents neither of us ever looked at twice. Nora found it first, actually. She'd gone out to grab something from Nathaniel's truck for school and came back holding a torn corner of cardstock she'd found wedged in the glove box, half shredded, with just enough of the handwriting left to make out 3 words. "Thank you, Solomon." She handed it to me without a word, her 15-year-old face doing that thing teenagers do when they already suspect the adults in their life aren't telling them the whole truth. That torn card sent me to the garage filing box, and what I found there wasn't about the lilies at all, not directly. It was a letter, over a decade old, from an insurance company Nathaniel had worked for briefly in his late 20s, before he moved into the finance job he's held for years now. The letter was a formal denial, a claim filed by a woman named Marlene Ray, appealing a coverage decision related to a hospital stay, denied on a technicality that Nathaniel's own signature had processed. I sat on the concrete garage floor holding that letter for a long time, doing math in my head, matching dates, realizing with a cold, sinking certainty that this was the same Marlene Ray, Solomon's late wife, the woman I had cared for the night everything changed for their family. Nathaniel had touched their lives years before I ever did, in a moment neither of us had known to connect until now. I called my closest friend at the hospital, a hospital chaplain named Rosalind Steele, who has sat with more grieving families in 20 years of chaplaincy than most people witness in a lifetime, and who has never once told me what to feel, only helped me sit with what I already did. I read her the letter over the phone, my hands still shaking. She was quiet for a long moment before she said something I haven't stopped thinking about since. Guilt makes people throw away things they can't stand to look at, Renee. It's not really about the flowers. It never was. I didn't confront Nathaniel again that night. I let him come home to a quiet house, let him tuck Elijah in, let him sit across from me at dinner, while Nora watched us both like she was waiting for the floor to open. I wasn't ready yet. I needed to understand the shape of what he'd been carrying before I decided how angry I was allowed to be. I thought about Solomon Ray, about how many Mondays he had stood in a florist's shop, choosing lilies for a woman who'd saved something for his daughter that he could never fully repay, never once knowing that the very man who denied his wife's insurance claim all those years ago was living under my roof, sleeping in my bed, raising my children. That night I lay awake replaying every ordinary dinner conversation Nathaniel and I had ever had about Solomon and Autumn, every polite question he'd asked that I had mistaken for kindness, and I understood, with a clarity that frightened me, that some of those questions had probably been born out of guilt rather than warmth. I didn't know yet whether Nathaniel had recognized the connection the moment the lilies first appeared 12 years ago, or whether it had only surfaced recently, once the investigators' search made Solomon Ray's name unavoidable in our house. Either answer terrified me for different reasons. And before this story goes any further, if you're the kind of person who reads every comment section looking for someone who understands, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps more than you'd think, and I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. By the following morning, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to wait for Nathaniel to explain himself on his own timeline anymore. I called Rosalind again and asked her one question I couldn't answer myself: whether there was a way to tell Solomon Ray the truth without destroying whatever fragile trust the two of us had built through my treatment of his daughter over the years. She told me something I needed to hear, even though I didn't want to. She said that some truths don't destroy trust. They only destroy the version of the story that was never true in the first place. I spent that Wednesday combing back through the old filing box more carefully than I had the first time, and what I found only deepened the picture. There were pay stubs from the insurance company confirming Nathaniel had worked there for just under 2 years, a stretch of his life he almost never mentioned, usually waving it off as a job I took right out of school before I figured out what I actually wanted to do. There was also a folded internal memo, still creased into quarters the way people fold things they intend to keep hidden rather than reference, outlining a company-wide push that quarter to deny a certain percentage of appeals, regardless of merit, in order to hit cost targets before the fiscal year closed. Nathaniel's initials were on the processing line of Marlene Ray's denial. He hadn't written the policy. He had only followed it, the way a 26-year-old with student loans and a new fiancé follows the instructions his supervisor hands him without asking too many questions. I understood that. I even had some sympathy for the version of him that existed back then, young and unformed and afraid of losing a paycheck. What I couldn't yet forgive was that he had known, for at least as long as the lilies had been arriving at our house instead of the hospital, exactly whose grief he had once had a hand in deepening, and he had said nothing. I called the man who had been his supervisor at that company, a name I found on an old employee directory tucked in the same filing box: Desmond Granger. More out of curiosity than any real plan, and to my surprise he was still listed at a different insurance firm across town. He didn't remember Nathaniel specifically, after all these years, but he remembered the era, the cost-cutting quarter, the pressure from corporate to deny anything borderline. "We were told it was just business," he said, in the flat, practiced tone of a man who had said the same sentence to justify 100 small cruelties over the course of a career. "I don't imagine your husband felt good about it. Most of the ones who stayed longer than a year or two didn't." That phone call didn't excuse anything, but it filled in a piece of the picture I hadn't had before. That Nathaniel had left that job within 2 years. That whatever guilt he carried about Marlene Ray's file had apparently been enough, even back then, to push him out of an industry he never returned to. I sat with that for a long time on Wednesday night, turning it over, trying to decide whether it changed anything about how angry I had every right to be. Rosalind called me back Thursday morning before my first patient, and this time she asked me a question instead of offering comfort. "Do you think Nathaniel has been punishing himself this whole time?" she asked. "Or do you think he's only been protecting himself from you finding out? Because those are two very different marriages you might be standing inside of, Renee, and you deserve to know which one you're actually in before you decide what happens next." I didn't have an answer for her. I still don't. Not fully, even now. I picked Elijah up from school that afternoon, and in the particular, unguarded way 8-year-olds say things adults have spent all day trying not to say, he mentioned, completely out of nowhere while buckling his seatbelt, that Daddy had been sad in the mornings for a long time. When I asked him what he meant, he shrugged and said Daddy stood by the window a lot before anyone else woke up. And one time Elijah asked him what he was looking at, and Daddy said, "Nothing, buddy, go back to bed," in a voice Elijah described as sounding like when Grandma Geraldine talks about Grandpa when he's not in the room. Out of the mouths of children, my 8-year-old son had understood in his own limited way that his father was grieving something long before I ever pieced it together myself. That night, after both kids were asleep, I sat Nathaniel down at the kitchen table, the same table those bouquets used to sit on, back when they still felt like something healing instead of something haunted, and I told him everything I'd found: the old employee directory, the denial letter, the call to Desmond Granger. I watched every trace of color leave his face as I spoke, and when I finished, he put his head in his hands and was quiet for a long time before he finally started talking, really talking, for the first time in 18 years of marriage, about the 2 years of his life he had spent trying hardest to forget. Nathaniel told me that night that he had recognized Marlene Ray's name the very first week the lilies started arriving, 12 years ago, long before I ever hired an investigator or untangled any part of the mystery myself. He said he'd seen the name on a delivery slip the florist had accidentally left tucked into an early bouquet, a slip meant for their records, listing the sender. He said his stomach had dropped reading it, the same way it had dropped years earlier signing off on her claim denial, and that he had told himself, at the time, it was probably a coincidence, a common enough name, a stretch too far. He said he buried that fear the same way he'd buried the job itself, refusing to look at it directly, hoping it would simply stay in the past where he'd left it. What changed, he told me, was the year I hired the private investigator. Once Solomon Ray's full name surfaced in our own kitchen conversations, once I started saying Solomon and Marlene and Autumn out loud at our dinner table, like they were simply facts of our shared life now, Nathaniel said the coincidence he'd been telling himself for over a decade collapsed all at once. He couldn't unknow it anymore. Every bouquet that arrived after that point wasn't just a kind gesture from a grateful stranger to him. It was a physical reminder, sitting on his own kitchen table, of a decision he'd made at 26 that had made a widow's hardest year even harder, delivered by the very man whose family he'd hurt, arriving in the house where his own wife now cared, professionally and personally, for that same family's healing. "I couldn't sit at dinner and look at those flowers anymore," he said, his voice cracking in a way I had genuinely never heard in 18 years of marriage. Every time I looked at them, I saw that letter. I saw my own signature. I told myself if they just disappeared, quietly, you'd stop bringing him up, and I could stop feeling like the worst version of myself every single Monday morning. He looked up at me then, eyes wet, and added the sentence that broke something open in me completely. "I wasn't protecting you from grief, Renee. I was protecting myself from having to explain who I used to be. I sat across from him at that table and felt a strange, complicated mixture of things all at once. Anger, yes, real anger. Because he had let me believe for months that the flowers had simply slowed on their own, when really he had been actively deciding, week after week, to erase a dying man's decade of gratitude rather than face a mistake from his 20s. But underneath the anger, something else too. A recognition, painful and unwelcome, of how much shame can warp a person's choices when they've never learned how to sit with it out loud. I thought about all the times I've watched parents in my own exam rooms make small, quiet, terrible decisions out of shame rather than malice. Skipping a follow-up appointment because they're embarrassed about a missed vaccine schedule, lying about a home situation because admitting the truth feels like admitting failure. I understood, in a clinical sense, exactly what shame does to good people. Understanding it in my own kitchen, aimed at my own marriage, was an entirely different thing to carry. "You should have told me," I said finally. "Not for Solomon's sake, for ours. I've spent 12 years chasing down a mystery that turned out to be tangled up in something you were carrying the entire time, and you let me do it alone." He nodded, and for the first time all week, he didn't try to defend himself further. "I know," he said. "I don't have a good reason. I only have the true one, and it isn't good enough. And before we go any further, if you've made it this far into the story, take a second to subscribe and turn on notifications. I promise you don't want to miss where this goes next." We didn't resolve anything that night. Not really. I told him I needed time before I decided what to do with what I now knew, and he didn't push back, which told me something too. That some part of him had been braced for this conversation for years, had maybe even wanted it, the way people sometimes engineer their own unraveling because they no longer have the strength to hold the lie together on their own. I went upstairs alone that night and sat on the edge of Nora's bed while she pretended to still be awake doing homework. And I told her, in general terms, that her father and I were working through something difficult, the kind of honest, age-appropriate half-truth I've learned to offer my own children the same way I offer it to frightened patients, enough to respect what they've already noticed, not so much that it becomes their burden to carry. She looked at me for a long moment and asked if we were going to be okay. I told her the truth, which was that I didn't know yet, and that not knowing yet wasn't the same thing as knowing the answer was no. She seemed to accept that. 15-year-olds, I'm learning, can hold more nuance than we usually give them credit for. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in the dark replaying 12 years of Mondays, wondering how many bouquets I'd genuinely never known existed, wondering whether the version of my marriage I thought I'd been living in for the last decade had ever really been the one I was actually in. Nathaniel slept, or pretended to, on the far edge of the bed, further from me physically than he'd been in years. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, I got up, went down to the kitchen, and sat with the 4 ruined bouquets still laid out on the counter where I'd left them 2 days earlier, now fully wilted, and I found myself grieving them the way I imagine Solomon must have grieved Marlene. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, private ache for something that couldn't be undone. By the time morning came, I understood I had a choice to make that had nothing to do with Nathaniel's job at 26, and everything to do with the 2 months he'd spent lying to me by omission while I lived beside him. Those were 2 separate wrongs, tangled together, but not identical, and I needed to be honest with myself about which one I was actually most angry about before I could decide what forgiveness, if any, looked like for either of them. I didn't tell Solomon Ray the truth right away. I sat with it for almost 2 weeks, turning the decision over the way I turn over a difficult diagnosis before I deliver it to a frightened parent. Not because the facts might change, but because how you say a hard truth matters almost as much as the truth itself. In the end, it was Rosalind who helped me see the shape of what I actually owed him. Not a confession dressed up as an apology on Nathaniel's behalf, and not silence either, just the truth, offered plainly, with room left for Solomon to decide what to do with it. I invited him in autumn, now a poised, curious 17-year-old who still remembers pieces of the night I treated her all those years ago, to the house on a Sunday afternoon. Nathaniel wanted to be there when I told them. I let him, though I made it clear he would speak for himself and nothing more. Solomon sat at our kitchen table, the same table, the one that had held 12 years of gratitude and 2 months of secret trash, and listened as Nathaniel told him, haltingly, about the insurance denial, about the 2 years of his life he'd spent trying to forget, about recognizing Marlene's name on that delivery slip a decade ago and never finding the courage to say so. I watched Solomon's face carefully while Nathaniel spoke, braced for anger, for a fight, for the kind of confrontation this show usually promises. What I saw instead was something quieter and, in its own way, harder to witness. Solomon was still for a long moment, his hands folded on the table exactly where his flowers used to sit, and when he finally spoke, his voice wasn't sharp at all. "I spent years hating the insurance company that fought Marlene's claim," he said. "I never once put a face to it. Maybe that's easier, in a way, hating a company instead of a person you can forgive. A company just stays a wall you keep hitting your head against." He looked at Nathaniel for a long moment. "I'm not going to pretend that doesn't sting, knowing you sat across from me all these years. But I've buried a wife, I've raised a daughter alone. I don't have room left in me for more anger than I'm already carrying. I'd rather use what's left of my life being grateful to the woman who saved what was left of my family than furious at the man who once, briefly, made things harder." It wasn't forgiveness exactly, at least not the tidy, complete kind television likes to promise. It was something more honest than that, an acknowledgement that grief and gratitude and old wrongs can all sit at the same table together without canceling each other out. Autumn, quiet through most of it, finally spoke up near the end, looking at Nathaniel directly. "My dad still sends flowers because of what she did for us," she said, nodding at me. "That doesn't have to change because of something you did before any of us knew each other. But maybe you should stop throwing them in the trash. They're not yours to decide are too much for her." Nathaniel didn't have an answer for that, and I don't think he needed one. Some sentences from a 17-year-old land exactly where they're meant to. In the weeks since that Sunday, Nathaniel and I have started seeing a marriage counselor together, something neither of us had ever tried in 18 years of assuming we could talk our way through anything on our own. We're not finished with this. I don't know yet whether the trust that cracked that Tuesday morning will ever fully knit back the way it was before, or whether it will simply become a different, more honest shape than the one we had. The lilies still come on Mondays, less often now that autumn is grown, and Solomon has slowly begun letting go of a ritual that has carried him through the hardest years of his life. But when they arrive, they sit on our kitchen table in plain sight, exactly where they belong, and Nathaniel looks at them now instead of looking away. Geraldine, predictably, has her own opinion about all of it. She cornered me at a family dinner 2 weeks after the truth came out and told me, in that particular tone she reserves for lecturing me about my marriage, that some things are better left buried, Renee, for the sake of the family. Harold, for once, didn't stay quiet the way he usually does when Geraldine starts in on me. He set down his fork and said, gently but firmly, that a family built on things left buried isn't much of a foundation at all, and that he was proud of Nathaniel for finally telling the truth, even 18 years and one very ruined trash can too late. Geraldine didn't have a response to that. I don't think I've ever loved my father-in-law more than I did in that moment. Elijah doesn't fully understand what happened, and I've been careful not to burden an 8-year-old with the details of an insurance denial from before he was born. What he does understand, in his own simple way, is that the flowers come back to the table now, instead of disappearing, and that Daddy doesn't stand alone at the window in the mornings anymore, at least not that Elijah's noticed. Small mercies, measured in an 8-year-old's careful observations, matter more to me these days than almost anything else. I asked Solomon, before he and Autumn left our house that Sunday afternoon, whether he thought he could ever look at Nathaniel without thinking of that old denial letter. He considered the question seriously, the way he considers most things, and said he honestly didn't know yet, but that he'd rather find out slowly, over time, than decide the answer in advance out of principle. I've thought about that answer more than almost anything else said that day. I think it's the most honest description of what forgiveness actually is that I've ever heard. Not a single decision made once and settled, but a slow, ongoing willingness to keep finding out. Nathaniel and I are still finding out too. Some nights our counseling sessions leave me more hopeful than I've felt in months. Other nights I go to bed still quietly furious about 2 months of ruined Mondays I'll never get back. 12 bouquets I never got to hold. Evidence of a decade-old debt that was never really mine to forgive on Marlene's behalf. Only mine to witness being repaid. Slowly, imperfectly, one honest conversation at a time. I still think about that Tuesday morning at the curb more than I probably should. The torn petal caught in the trash lid, the 4 ruined bouquets, the particular sound of my husband's truck pulling out of the driveway without a goodbye. It taught me something I didn't expect a marriage to teach me at 43, that the people we love don't always hide things out of malice. Sometimes they hide things out of a shame so old and so deeply buried that they've convinced themselves silence is a kindness rather than the quiet betrayal it actually is. I don't know if I've fully forgiven Nathaniel. I know I've started trying, one counseling session at a time, one honest conversation at a time, one Monday bouquet left sitting proudly on the table instead of vanishing before I ever see it. I keep coming back to what Solomon Ray said at that table about not having room left in him for more anger than he was already carrying. I think about how many of us walk around holding grudges against faceless systems, faceless companies, faceless decisions, when the truth sitting behind them is almost always a person, flawed, frightened, doing what they thought they had to do to survive their own circumstances. It doesn't excuse the harm. It just makes the harm human. And somehow that's both more forgivable and more painful all at once. I still don't know what I would have done in Nathaniel's position at 26, fresh out of school, a supervisor breathing down his neck, a stack of files he was told to process without asking too many questions. I'd like to believe I would have pushed back. I'd like to believe I would have refused. But I've also sat in enough exam rooms with exhausted parents making imperfect choices to know that certainty about our own goodness is usually easiest to hold on to from a safe distance, long after the moment that actually tested it has passed. So here's what I want to ask you, because I think this one doesn't have a clean answer. Do you think Nathaniel deserved to be forgiven for what he did at 26? Or was throwing those bouquets away for 2 months its own separate wrong that deserves its own separate reckoning, regardless of what came before it? I'd genuinely love to know where you land, because my own answer keeps shifting depending on which part of that Tuesday morning I'm remembering when you ask me. If this story moved you even a little, do me a favor and hit that like button before you go. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need these kinds of stories in their lives. Leave a comment below and tell me what you would have done in my position, standing at that curb with ruined flowers in your bare hands. Share this video with someone in your life who understands what it means to love someone imperfectly, because I promise you, we all do. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter of this story, because my life, much like everyone else's, is rarely finished teaching me things the easy way. And subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because there is always more of my story waiting to be told. Last thing, always, tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from tonight. I read every single one, and it means more to me than you probably realize to know how far these stories travel.